Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, December 7th, 2022. Supreme Court hears a challenge to the power of state courts to review and strike down state legislatures' drawing of congressional district maps or passing voting laws for congressional and presidential elections on the grounds they violate the state constitution. Coming up, oral argument in the case out of North Carolina proposing this independent state legislature theory, and we'll get analysis from USA Today Supreme Court reporter John Fritze. Democrats on Capitol Hill celebrating Senator Raphael Warnock's victory Tuesday night in a runoff election in Georgia against Republican Herschel Walker. We'll hear from the candidates along with the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre about how having that extra seat in the Senate will change how the Democratic majority handles their agenda. The annual Defense Policy and Programs Bill, known as the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, starting to move through Congress, and the bill that they'll take up will repeal the military's COVID-19 vaccine mandate. It's a move championed by Republicans, but the White House asked today whether it could lead to a presidential veto. A ceremony at the World War II Memorial on this National Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day, and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff holding a roundtable on combating anti-Semitism, saying, "I will not remain silent. I am proud to be Jewish. I am proud to live openly as a Jew. I am not afraid. I refuse to be afraid." Now to today's Supreme Court oral argument in Moore v. Harper. NBC News writes it this way. Conservative Supreme Court justices on Wednesday appeared skeptical about a state court's decision to strike down Republican-drawn congressional districts in North Carolina, but it seemed unlikely a majority would embrace a broad theory that could upend election laws nationwide. The appeal brought by North Carolina Republicans asked the court, which has a 6-3 conservative majority, to embrace a hitherto obscure legal argument called the independent state legislature theory, which could strip state courts of the power to strike down certain election laws enacted by state legislatures. The independent state legislature argument hinges on language in the Constitution. It says election rules shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. That from NBC News. As part of the oral argument, Justice Sonia Sotomayor questioning David Thompson, attorney for Tim Moore, the Republican Speaker of the North Carolina House of Representatives.
Let me go back to what I don't fundamentally understand about this case. The text of the Constitution, the Election Clause, says, the legislature in each state shall prescribe the time, place, and manner of elections. We know that before the founding, at the founding of the Constitution, decades after, and even to today, that state constitutions have regulated time, place, and manner. We have the voice votes. We have one constitution that set elections at the courthouse and not in the county where the legislature wanted it. We have laws about voice votes as opposed to ballot votes. It seems to me that if I'm a textualist, and I read that the legislature in each state shall prescribe the time, place, and manner of elections, that your argument would have to be that you can't regulate, the state constitution can't regulate that. But there is no substantive limitation in the Constitution. And the 10th Amendment says, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. And if there's no substantive limitation in the Elections Clause, I don't know how we could read one in.
Your Honor, so I think there are a few points there.
It's a reserved power to the states to decide whether apportionment or malapportionment should be prohibited. We've already had a case, Grow, by Justice Scalia, who said that was perfectly okay for a state constitution to prohibit malapportionment. Under your theory, the state constitution shouldn't have been permitted to do that substantive thing. So Explain it to me.
Yes, so let me start with where Your Honor started, which was with the history. And we read the history very differently than my friends on the other side, because they point to 16 constitutions early in the founding of the Republic that they claim regulate federal elections. 5 of those relate to transitional governments. There was no state legislature, so it would have been impossible for the state legislature to adopt the first rules, and by their own terms, they were schedules that faded away once the state legislature had been elected. Then that leaves 9 which say that have regulations relating to—
There were only 13.
Well, I'm giving them credit.
There were 13 colonies, Counselor. If I got 6 of them doing something that's contrary to what you're saying, that seems like a fairly substantial majority to me.
Well, Your Honor, I'm going to get—
You can try to knock them down one at a time, but you still with about 6 of them that can't be disputed.
I'm going to knock them all down with 1, so it'll be 12-1 in my favor by the time I'm done, Your Honor.
Yes, if you rewrite history, it's very easy to do.
I'm not rewriting history, Your Honor. What we're saying is that when it says all elections, it's referring to the offices that were created by that Constitution. You can see that in Vermont. It says all freeholders shall be eligible for office. It's not talking about the presidency of the United States because there's an age qualification. It's talking about
So why is it that in all of those states, the legislatures understood that all elections meant that you were going to have paper elections, ballots in both federal and congressional?
I think it is telling what those state legislatures understood. And if we look at Pennsylvania and Tennessee, they took those all elections shall be by ballot, and they promulgated 2 statutes to implement that, to implement and regulate their elections laws. For the state ones, they passed a law saying all elections shall be by ballot for the state races, and they cited back to those state constitutional provisions. And then they passed a separate law for the federal elections, and they did not cite back to that provision. Why not? Because presumably they understood that they were not bound by that, but they were simply trying to harmonize.
That is a large step, Counselor.
Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor with attorney David Thompson during the oral argument in the case of Moore v. Harper argued today. One of the attorneys on the other side, Neil Katyal, on behalf of the public interest group Common Cause, here questioned by Justice Clarence Thomas.
If the state legislature had been very, very generous to minority voters in their redistricting, and the state Supreme Court said under their state constitution that this violated their own state constitution of North Carolina, would you be making the same argument?
So, yes, I mean, if
you
there
just,
is...
and Justice Gorsuch said it seems as though it depends on whose ox is being gored, so I'm changing which ox is being gored.
Yeah, no, we don't think anything turns on the substance of the individual decisions.
But
here.
You would still be there making the same argument.
Our point to you, Justice Thomas, is that this court has never second-guessed state court interpretations of their own constitution. And so if there's a general clause and it happens to benefit or hurt minority voters, as Judge Sutton says, that's a process the states deal with. And as I was saying to Justice Alito, there's a special safeguard here, which is the second half of the elections clause, which allows Congress to supplant whatever that errant state court decision is.
So what is it, again, I'd like you to just tell me what is the source of the authority for the state of North Carolina Supreme Court to be involved in a federal election. I understand that there's no disagreement about a state legislator, but this is a federal election, and it's similar to the problem we had with the presidential election in Bush v. Gore.
It's just like Smiley, Your Honor. It's the exact same thing. So there is a federal issue. The North Carolina court is interpreting the elections clauses and powers, and the question is whether or not they have misread it or not. And so I think that's the source of the alleged substantive violation here. I think you're absolutely right. The spirit of your question, for 233 years, This court's never gotten involved and said, hey, we're going to, rove and say the North Carolina court got it wrong or their provision was too abstract for enforcement or anything like that. Rather, this court has always stayed on the sidelines, let the state process unfold, subject to that other part of the trident check, Congress, in the second half of the Elections Clause.
Justice Clarence Thomas and Neil Katyal, attorney for the group Common Cause. John Fritze is Supreme Court correspondent for USA Today. He's been listening to the oral argument in the Supreme Court case, Moore v. Harper, and joins us now by phone. Thank you very much. So what did you hear today about how the justice might rule in this issue of state court oversight of the legislatures when it comes to federal election maps and laws?
I mean, I think there was a lot of division in the court. I don't think it was super clear cut. I think it's clear where three of the conservatives are. Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch, I think, seemed to signal a pretty strong embrace of this broader theory. I think the three liberals, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, all were highly skeptical of this broad theory raised by the North Carolina lawmakers. And then you've got sort of these three in the middle, starting with Roberts, also Barrett and Kavanaugh, that were a little less clear. And I think Roberts in particular seemed to be looking for maybe something a little more narrow, maybe a win for the Republican lawmakers in North Carolina, but maybe in a way with less implications or less reach than they are hoping for.
Leading up to today's oral argument, those opposing what North Carolina was doing were saying that democracy is on the line. There could be very far-reaching consequences if this independent state legislative theory is adopted. What's the potential should it be adopted?
I think the thing about it is that nobody's fully clear what this independent state legislature theory is, right? I mean, people are clear. That's being a little flip. I think there's a lot of different readings of it. And in its most sort of pure form, that's probably true, that there would be potentially huge implications, because what you're talking about is, if embraced in its most pure form, a situation where maybe governors wouldn't have veto power, right? Because this is based on the Elections Clause in the Constitution, which delegates authority for laws governing federal elections to just the legislature. It doesn't say anything about state courts, but nor does it say anything about state governors, nor does it say anything about independent redistricting commissions, which a lot of states have set up. And so I think, if you sort of take it out to its farthest conclusion, there's all sorts of laws that states pass. Think about when polls are open or closed, or how absentee ballots are handled, or voting ID requirements, right? All of those things, a one-party state legislature could pass a bunch of rules that people would say would benefit only that party. And then there'd be very little ability for courts, particularly state courts, to offer any sort of check on those actions. So I think that would be a pretty broad and sweeping change in the way things have gone for a long time. There are more limited readings of the theory as well, where there would be, I think, potentially significantly less impact.
We're talking with John Fritze from USA Today. Also want to ask you about the length of the oral argument. It went 3 hours, and this is becoming the norm. What can we read into that?
It really is becoming the norm. I think part of this is coming out of the pandemic. The court moved to this different format. And what everybody's familiar with is sort of the 30-minute free-for-all, which is what it had always been, or has been in the modern times. But during the pandemic, that kind of got flipped on its head a little bit, because when they were virtual, they had to go in order, right? Like, it didn't work. Like, think about your Zoom meeting where everybody's trying to speak at the same time. It doesn't work. And so they moved to this more ordered structure. And a lot of the justices, I think, like that, partly because if you didn't get a question in, if you couldn't get a word in, you're sort of guaranteed you have a reservation at the table, for the table, so to speak. And so I think that the court kind of did this, landed on this hybrid thing. So like a little bit of free for all, and then this seriatim questioning, and it's just taking a long time. And add to that this case, you had four different parties arguing. You had a divided argument. You had three parties on one side, and then the lawyer for the North Carolina lawmakers. So you just had a lot of people up there speaking. And but you're right. These cases are going on. And, for people who like to watch this stuff, it's great, right? Like you really get a deep exploration of these things. It's hard on the lunch hour, though.
And today's case, do we expect, because of the controversial nature of it, the decision will be near the end of the term, as most of these types of cases are?
I think that's a safe bet. I mean, I never want to say exactly. Who knows, right? Sometimes they surprise me. But I think given the divisions in this case, that seems very likely. You look at how there was this case earlier this week, 303 Creative, involving LGBTQ rights and public accommodation law. And, that case, I think it was far more clear how the court was going to rule in that. I still think that'll be a June decision. But when you have divisions like this, I find that it tends to take a lot longer for them to get it done. This was already a huge case with huge implications. So end of June seems like a really safe bet for this one.
John Fritze is Supreme Court correspondent for USA Today. His stories at usatoday.com and on Twitter at jfritze. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And C-SPAN covered the oral argument in today's case, Moore v. Harper. You can find the audio. It's only audio now coming out of the Supreme Court at our website, cspan.org. Next are the results of the Georgia Senate runoff election. Incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock defeating Republican challenger Herschel Walker on Tuesday, 51.3% to 48.7%. That works out to be about 100,000 votes from the 3.5 million cast. Associated Press writing, Senator Warnock's victory ensures Democrats an outright majority in the Senate for the rest of President Joe Biden's current term and caps an underwhelming midterm cycle for the Republicans in the last major vote of the year. And with Senator Warnock's second runoff victory in as many years, Democrats will have a 51-49 Senate majority, gaining a seat from the current 50-50 split with John Fetterman's victory in Pennsylvania. And they also note there will be divided government, however, with Republicans having narrowly flipped House control. That from AP. Here's Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, today on Capitol Hill.
They say all good things come to those who wait, and this outcome is absolutely worth the wait. After 1 year, 10 months, and 17 days of the longest 50-50 Senate in history, 51, a slim majority. That is great, and we are so happy about it. First and foremost, I want to congratulate Raphael Warnock. I spoke to him this morning again on running, and he'll be up here later today, on running just a great race. Strong, inspiring, unifying, never daunted. I remember calling him the day the vote came in the general election. And even though he was disappointed that he came close, but not at 50, and he'd have to run again, he said, I'm raring to go, and we're going to win the runoff. And, of course, he did by not 0.5% or 1%, but by close to 3%.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, news conference today on Capitol Hill. He also talked about how Senate operations will change with the Democrats now having a 51-49 seat majority compared to the current 50-50, with only Vice President Kamala Harris's vote as president of the Senate giving Democrats the barest of majorities.
The practical effects of the 51-seat majority, it's big, it's significant, it gives us we can breathe a sigh of relief. Obviously, judges and nominees will be a lot easier to put on the bench. We are so proud of our record with judges. It's one of the most significant things, maybe the most even, things we've done. As you know, we put on the bench 2/3 are women, half are people of color. There are more black women on the federal bench now than there has ever, I think more today than all the others combined before we got into the majority. Biden became president, and we got into the majority. And they're people who come, they know what people's lives are like. They're not just corporate lawyers or prosecutors. their public aid, immigration lawyers and consumer advocates and legal aid people, public defenders. So the bench is looking more like America. Now it's going to be easier. So are the nominees. It's been amazing how Republicans have been able to use the 50-50 Senate to procedurally hold up so many appointments. It's going to be a lot quicker, swifter, and easier. It's also going to mean that our committee chairs have more flexibility on legislation. The number of times chairs came to me and said, I'd like to move this bill forward, but in a 10-10 committee, I can't do it. It'll be tied. That's all going to change because we'll have the advantage on every committee. It's going to mean that our committees will have greater oversight ability, subpoena power. And people say, well, it's the Biden administration. Oh, no, no, no. Subpoena power can deal with corporate corruption and inequities and other problems throughout the country. And it gives us just a lift. The fact that we got the 51 votes gives us just a great feeling, enthusiasm, unity, encouragement in that way.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, today on Capitol Hill. Washington Post has a story about the Georgia Senate runoff election. Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, said the outcome of the Senate race proved that Republicans need to broaden their base of support beyond Donald Trump's loyalists if they want to win races. Senator Cornyn said, I think he's less relevant all the time. Even if you capture all the Trump voters, you may be able to win a primary, but you're not necessarily going to win a general election. And in this business, you have to win an election before you actually govern. That from the Washington Post. Senator Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, is chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, the campaign arm of the Senate Republicans, today asked about the Georgia election at his own news conference.
Do you think that this whole push that you're going for kind of ties into how Warnock won in Georgia? I mean, why do you think Walker lost yesterday in Georgia? And do you think that it's time for your party to kind of step away from Trump when it comes to these races?
Well, I think, first off, every race is an individual race, and for me, it's very disappointing. As you know, I was very optimistic going into November. I think we all have to figure out what we have to do differently. 70% of the country, I think it is, thinks we're heading the wrong direction. I know as a group, what we are hoping to do is let's focus on the issues and try to redirect where we get, some positive things done for the American public. I think every one of us, and I think every senator came up here to do that. I just think we've got to now do everything we can to make that happen. I think it's a big win to what we did with the NDA. I think that we've got to figure out how we get our fiscal house in order. I think Mike and I came up at the same time, but Senator Lee and Senator Paul have been up here. Why aren't we passing budgets? I mean, this just doesn't make any sense. We're business guys, and I borrowed a lot of money at one time. I had to go to the bank with a plan, and if I didn't make my plan, I was in trouble. So we've got to start doing that.
Senator Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, he chairs the National Republican Senatorial Committee, a news conference today with other Senate Republicans. The main topic was the negotiations over the government spending bill, but branching off a bit into the Georgia runoff election results. President Joe Biden tweeting Tuesday night with a picture of himself on the phone, just called Senator Warnock to congratulate him on his win, the president writes. Tonight, Georgia voters stood up for our democracy, rejected ultra-MAGA-ism, and most importantly, sent a good man back to the Senate. Here's to 6 more years. And during today's White House briefing, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre asked about how the extra Senate seat affects the Biden administration's priorities and tactics.
On the Georgia Senate election, with Senator Warnock's re-election having 51 Senate seats, what does that mean for possible changes in how the White House approaches its policy agenda and confirmation process?
So I want to give you a little bit of color on the call. I know some folks had some questions about how the call went. So Senator Warnock, well, first, as you know, the president called Senator Warnock last night when we got back from Phoenix, Arizona, and Senator Warnock thanked the president for the call, and they talked about their partnership and the importance of their continued work together in the months and years ahead. Look, What I would say to your question, Josh, about what this means for moving forward when it comes to the president's legislative agenda, when it comes to Democrats' legislative agenda, it's that it gives us a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more ability to deliver for the American people. The president has been very clear these past almost 2 years that his main priority, his main objective is to make sure that the American public, the American people, when it comes to the economy, we build it from the bottom up, middle out, giving people real opportunities. You see that in his economic initiatives and priorities, his plans. When you see the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, which I just mentioned at the top, and when you think about the American Rescue Plan, the first big piece of legislation that this president passed with only Democratic votes, which met the moment that he walked into with an economy that was really tanking, and he helped make sure that people got shots in arms, helped the economy get back on its feet, and we've seen these successes, which in the last two years. Again, this is going to give us a little bit more of that breathing room to get things done, to continue to move forward with what the American people want. And they were very clear in the midterms. What the American people want is they want to continue the agenda that the president had the last 2 years.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her daily briefing in the White House briefing room. A little bit more from the Associated Press article on this runoff election, Senate race in Georgia. Total turnout still trailed the 2021 runoff turnout of about 4.5 million. Voting rights groups pointed to changes made by state lawmakers after the 2020 election that shortened the period for runoffs from 9 weeks to 4 as a reason for the decline in early and mail voting. C-SPAN covered the victory and concession speeches in Atlanta Tuesday night. First, here is Herschel Walker conceding.
There's no excuses in life, and I'm not going to make any excuses now because we put up one heck of a fight. And I said, that's what we got to do, because this is much bigger. This is much bigger than Herschel Walker. And I told someone this the other day. I said, you guys, I've done a lot of stuff. You talk about Heisman Trophy, you talk about all the athletic awards, business awards I won, but the best thing I've ever done in my whole entire life is run for the Senate seat right here. And the reason I'm going to say that is I got a chance to meet all you and to hear what you guys feel about this country. And I got a chance for you guys to tell me what you do feel about this country. I got a chance to go into your homes, got a chance that you invested in Herschel Walker. And I thank you. And I thank you so much. And as I said, we can't blame no one, because I want you to continue to believe in this country, believe in our elected officials, and most of all, stay together. Don't let anyone separate you. Don't let anyone tell you that we can't, because I'm here to tell you we can. And I'm here to tell you we can. And as I said early on, God is good, and he's a good God. All the time, he's a good God. So I want to say, I'm never going to stop fighting for Georgia. I'm never going to stop fighting for you, because you're my family. Because I'm a winner. We all winners, so we're all winners, and that's what I want to say. We're all winners, and I want to say God is a good God. God bless you guys, and let me tell you, stay together. Continue to believe in our elected official. Always, always cast your votes, no matter whatever is happening. Cast your vote for all that. In God we trust. I do. In God we trust. Continue to cast your vote. Never, never, never give up. All right? God bless you guys. Thank you, guys. Now, thank you.
Herschel Walker in Atlanta Tuesday night, conceding the race in the U.S. Senate election, the runoff election in Georgia. The winner, Senator Raphael Warnock, a Democrat, elected to a 6-year term. He celebrated at his own victory party.
I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, and to God be the glory. For the great things that God has done. And after a hard-fought campaign, or should I say campaigns, it is my honor to utter the four most powerful words ever spoken in a democracy. The people have spoken. I often say that a vote is a kind of prayer for the world we desire for ourselves and for our children. Voting is faith put into action. And Georgia, you have been praying with your lips and your legs. With your hands and your feet, your heads and your hearts. You have put in the hard work, and here we are standing together.
Senator Raphael Warnock, Democrat from Georgia, Tuesday night in Atlanta after winning the runoff election against Republican Herschel Walker. Congressman Lee Zeldin, Republican from New York, announcing today he is not going to challenge Ronna McDaniel for the chairmanship of the Republican National Committee when the RNC holds its winter meeting in January. But he's urging her not to run again. The congressman writing, "Change is desperately needed, and there are many leaders, myself included, ready and willing to step up and ensure our party retools and transforms as critical elections fast approach. However, the issue is Chairwoman McDaniel's reelection appears to already be pre-baked, as if the disappointing results of every election during her tenure, including yesterday in Georgia, do not and should not even matter. I won't be running for RNC chair at this time with McDaniel's reelection pre-baked by design, but that doesn't mean she should even be running again. It's time for the GOP to elect new leadership. It's time for fresh blood." A statement from Congressman Lee Zeldin. Wall Street today, the Dow up 1, NASDAQ down 56, and S&P down 7. Washington today continues in a moment.
Live Thursday on C-SPAN Radio at 9 a.m. Eastern, a Washington Post Live interview with U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. He'll discuss the Biden administration's climate policies at home and abroad. Also, Utah Republican Senator Mitt Romney will discuss U.S. investments in clean energy innovation and the prospects for bipartisan cooperation in the next Congress. Then, at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, a House Judiciary Committee convenes a hearing to discuss politics and the Supreme Court. Follow along on the free C-SPAN Now video app or right here on C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. The National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, is starting to move through Congress. CNN reports that the White House declined to say whether President Joe Biden will sign the must-pass annual defense bill if it includes a provision in current text to rescind the military's COVID-19 vaccine mandate, reiterating that the president continues to support a mandate but leaving the door open to a repeal. The inclusion of that provision in the legislative text was released Tuesday. CNN calls it a key win for Republicans. We'll hear from the White House in a few minutes, but first, the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor supporting the removal of that mandate.
Yesterday evening, the Senate and House Armed Services Committee released a strong, bipartisan National Defense Authorization Act. As Republicans have said for months, and I repeated yesterday, Our service members, commanders, and civilian leaders should not have had to wait until mid-December to gain certainty for a fiscal year that's already more than 2 months over. We've got to take our national defense, military modernization, and defense industrial base as seriously as our rivals take theirs. Fortunately, this strong bipartisan NDAA is a huge step in that direction. The bill tees up a significant and badly needed increase in defense spending, $45 billion above President Biden's insufficient request, and roughly $75 billion over last year's level. Once again, Congress agreed on a bipartisan basis that President Biden's defense budget request was anemic and insufficient. This NDAA authorizes crucial projects like nuclear modernization. It directs critical investments in our defense industrial base so America can both defend ourselves and remain the arsenal of democracy for the world. It delivers for our service members, their families, and our military installations and communities around the country. Thanks to leadership from our colleague Senator Blackburn, among others, this NDAA will repeal the President's military vaccine mandate, a policy which this Democratic administration had stubbornly clung to, even as it had clearly undermined readiness and hurt retention. And just as Republicans insisted, just as our service members deserve, this NDAA is not getting dragged down by unrelated liberal nonsense. Good, smart policies were kept in, and unrelated nonsense, like easier financing for illegal drugs, was kept out. I'm glad this Democrat-led Congress finally realized that defending America is a basic governing duty. It's not some Republican priority that Democrats can demand unrelated goodies to be wheedled into. Neither party, let alone a sitting president's party, can ever have the mindset that they need to be goaded or bartered into supporting our troops. We made it clear we wouldn't be going down that road. Our Democratic colleagues finally accepted it, and Senators Reid and Inhofe did a great job landing the plane. Now, that same lesson must carry over into our subsequent conversations about government funding. Democrats must be ready to actually fund the national defense, which this bipartisan NDAA authorizes.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor, talking about the NDAA, also referring to the government spending negotiations as current spending runs out on December 16th. At the White House, the Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre asked for the president's view of the defense bill and specifically that repeal of the COVID-19 vaccine mandate.
On the National Defense Authorization Act, it doesn't include a military COVID vaccine mandate. Is the president's objection to removing that mandate so strong that he's willing to veto the NDAA?
So let me just first say, I'll answer that question, but I do want to make a few points here. So I don't want to get ahead of the process. As we know, there's the conference language. There's still the legislative process that has to move ahead on this. And so again, I'm not going to get ahead of the vote, or I'm not going to get ahead of the president. But every year, as you know, the NDAA has some provisions we support and some we do not. And what the president's going to do is he's going to judge this piece of legislation, this bill, on its entirety when that occurs. Again, there's a process moving, there's a process that's happening, and so we're going to let that happen in Congress. I will note, just to be very, very clear here, what we saw, what we think happened here is Republicans in Congress have decided that they rather fight against the health and well-being of our troops than protecting them. And we believe that it is a mistake. What we saw happen on the NDAA as it relates to the vaccine mandate. Making sure our troops are prepared and ready for service is a priority for President Biden. The vaccination requirement for COVID does just that. I'll add one more thing, just a little bit of a data point here, so all of you have this. Look, before COVID vaccine existed, nearly 700 Department of Defense personnel and service members died of COVID. almost 100 of them were active duty. And so since this past spring, there has been one death due to COVID. So vaccinations work and save the lives of our service members. So we believe that it was a mistake.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Reuters has an article that said that the National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said that more than 99% of active duty troops have received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. And according to Defense Department data, 3,717 Marines, 1,816 soldiers, and 2,064 sailors have been discharged for refusing to get vaccinated. Over at the Pentagon, the press secretary there, Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh, asked for the Defense Secretary's view.
Is there concern in the building that if this bill does pass with with this wording, that DoD will be required to reinstate service members it has separated for refusing the vaccine?
So again, this is pending legislation introduced late last night. The Secretary over the weekend was very clear in his comments that he supports continuing and maintaining the vaccine mandate. He fully believes, this administration believes, that the vaccine has done incredible work in terms of saving lives of not just our service members, but people all across the country. And he believes that the health and readiness of our forces is a priority. So in terms of how we view the legislation, he has been continuously supportive of keeping the mandate in.
Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh. The National Defense Authorization Act that's coming up for a vote in Congress authorizes almost $858 billion in national defense spending for fiscal year 2023, and it includes a 4.6% pay raise for service members and Pentagon civilian workforce employees. At the World War II Memorial today in Washington, D.C., a ceremony on this National Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day, the 81st anniversary of the Japanese attack on the military fleet in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, that led the United States to formally enter World War II. Keynote speech given by Christopher Grady, Vice Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Engraved on the walls here, over here on my right, in white granite from the hills of South Carolina, are the words President Franklin Delano Roosevelt delivered on this famous date. And he said, quote, "No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people, in their righteous might, will win through to absolute victory." And that is exactly what this nation did. 16 million donned the cloth of our nation to serve on freedom's frontier. And across the home front, this nation unified for a singular mission: to defeat tyranny. For the next 45 months, we fought across 44 campaigns in the cities of Europe and Africa and on the islands of the Pacific. 160,000 of Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy against a hardened enemy. The mighty 8th Air Force put up 1,500 bomber raids over the skies of Europe. Ike and Bradley and Patton created a stiff defense that repelled Germany's last push at the Battle of the Bulge. And on the northern line, the staunch 99th Infantry, outnumbered 5-1, imposed casualties at a rate of 18-1. Meanwhile, Bull Halsey and Chester Nimitz and Chesty Puller led the fleet into the fight, taking on the Empire of Japan. And so Americans sacrificed their lives in the hedges of Europe and on the coral of the Pacific. They fought on land thousands of miles from their homes and birthplaces, and they fought justly for humanity in the conduct of great power war.
Christopher Grady is Vice Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. on this National Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. Members of Congress also marking the day. Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, tweeting, 81 years ago, America was maliciously attacked and abruptly thrown into war. 2,403 service members and civilians made the ultimate sacrifice defending our nation. We honor their patriotism, service, and memory on this historic and infamous day. And Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat from Arizona, Tweeting, "Today we honor the thousands of American lives lost during the attack on Pearl Harbor, including 1,177 brave sailors on the USS Arizona. We'll never forget their sacrifice." President Biden tweeted on Friday, "The Holocaust happened. Hitler was a demonic figure. And instead of giving it a platform, our political leaders should be calling out and rejecting anti-Semitism wherever it hides. Silence is complicity." Washington Post writing about this, saying that tweet was seemingly directed in part at Donald Trump, who has not disavowed his dinner guest, referring to the recent dinner at his Florida estate with white supremacist Nick Fuentes and the rapper Ye, both of whom have advocated anti-Semitic views. Today, the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, husband of Vice President Kamala Harris and the first Jewish spouse of the U.S. Vice President, holding a roundtable at the White House with Jewish organizations talking about combating anti-Semitism. Doug Emhoff speaking of his family, saying they immigrated to the U.S. to flee persecution.
My great-grandparents escaped persecution from what is now Poland around 120 years ago. As second gentleman, I visited Ellis Island, and I remember getting to see their names on the ship manifests and those early census reports. Those images, they just live on in my mind. And I grew up in a typical Jewish family, born in Brooklyn, moved to Jersey. Dad worked in the city. I went to Temple Shalom in Old Bridge, New Jersey, got bar mitzvahed in my three-piece velour suit. And then we moved to California. And I became a lawyer. And one of the reasons I became a lawyer was because of tzedek, justice, standing up for others, fighting inequality. And what I've learned over the years, Judaism isn't defined by how much you go to temple or how often you celebrate traditions. It's who we are as a people. It's our identity. It's my identity. And I'm in pain right now. We're all in pain right now. Our community is in pain. It hurts. It hurts me to see what we're going through right now, what all people are going through right now. Anti-Semitism is dangerous. We cannot normalize this. We all have an obligation to condemn these vile acts. We must all of us cannot stay silent. And there is no either or on this one. There's no both sidesism on this one. There's only one side. Everyone, all of us, must be against this, must be against anti-Semitism. And we know when people refuse to condemn this vile speech and these vile acts, refuse to condemn them, it only serves to ignite violence among extremists.
Second gentleman Doug Emhoff at the White House today, a roundtable discussion that included Jewish organizations, the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Congress, and Jewish on Campus among them. ABC News reports that a prominent adherent of the QAnon and Pizzagate conspiracy theories posed for photos with former President Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago resort Tuesday night after speaking at an event hosted at the club, according to photos and videos posted to social media. According to those posts, the event was billed as a fundraiser in support of a documentary on sex trafficking, one of the pillars of the QAnon conspiracy theory. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.